Welcome to the Inspiro Podcast, a podcast exploring personal growth, leadership, strategy, communication, and fulfillment. We are your hosts, Jason Luchtefeld and Bill Woodburn. I'm here as a dentist, transitioning into a career to help facilitate individuals and their organizations towards a more fulfilling future.
Hi there, I'm Bill Woodburn, and I'm a licensed professional counselor and licensed marriage and family therapist in Austin, Texas. I'm fascinated by the way people come together to solve problems, whether that's couples or families, dental practices, or organizations. We're going to be exploring a lot of topics, and for us to be able to be free to do that, I have to let you know that this is not intended to be dental advice or counseling advice.
Well, that's a great point. How do we support others in those times? I think there's, again, different levels to this, because sometimes people can say how they want to be supported, and sometimes they can't.
Yes.
And so trying to be in that situation where you're supporting somebody and you want to do it in a way that they're going to appreciate, and at the same time, you don't, this is me personally, my personal opinion speaking, but you don't want to be too pushy about it. And so you tend to be almost the opposite, where it's like, hey, I'm here if you need me. But at the same time, they're not inclined to reach out if they need you because they're grieving. And so you end up with two people that are like avoiding each other because they don't know what to do.
You know, there is a very, very tricky balance point between needing privacy to grieve and also needing company when we grieve. And that's a tough one to hit. And I think it's even a bit of a moving target as time goes on. It's like, how much do I need people to gather around me to come over to the house to bring a casserole, whatever. And how much do I wish they'd all go away and let me sit in the dark and grieve? I think we just approximate and we try. I think some rituals are important there. Many years ago, when my mom lost her husband, I realized that there were 3 goodbyes she had to say that were sort of mandated by the culture. One is she said goodbye at the hospital. Okay. But then she said goodbye at a church memorial service. But then she goes out to the cemetery for the lowering the casket, and she says goodbye there. And I thought, okay. And there are different amounts of people and different people in those 3 goodbyes. A couple of nurses and a doctor, and then there's like everybody in town, crowds into the Methodist church to the funeral. And then there's family at the graveside. I thought, oh yeah, it's when it works, it is getting managed a little bit. And there is some sort of, there are people here, but then this is what we do. And yet I noticed that she needed to say goodbye 3 times in sort of 3 different ways.
And that, again, is something she needed, but also a fairly common ritual in our society. I've experienced that same set of that same trio of processes with multiple grandparents. And so I think this is a bit of a tangent, but it makes me wonder if that's something we need, or that's something that society has built as just a mechanism for how we bury someone.
Yeah. But the thing I think that is important is it needs to express something significant. I think if it's just by rote, it's a problem.
Yeah.
But I think if those goodbyes are done each one in a meaningful way, that accomplishes what that particular goodbye is supposed to accomplish.
Yeah.
Um, for my stepfather, it was, the first one was goodbye to his body, his sort of mortal remains at the hospital. The finishing of that phase of going to the hospital and being there for a while, and we're wrapping this up. And then the memorial service, which was very much about the community.
Mm-hmm.
We're all going to say goodbye in a public way. And then there was the graveside, which was just saying goodbye in like a family way.
Yeah.
And I thought that doesn't mean that couldn't have gone really bad, but that sense of, oh yeah, that there had to be something accomplished here in each one of these.
Yeah.
And if it gets accomplished, then it's pretty good. And if it becomes too rote, too stale, or not the right thing, that would be a problem.
Another interesting piece here. We oftentimes do these things at the request of the person that has passed, rather than the person that needs it.
That's funny, isn't it? That's kind of weird.
So I wonder, we tend to, I think this is a piece of like legacy. It's like, what do I want people to be saying at my funeral? That's something you hear in,
yes. But my reaction is that's kind of none of your business.
Yeah, but it's also, I'm not going to care.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's none of your business what people say about you at your funeral. I mean,
yeah.
Also, there's this thing of, well, this is what I want people to say at my funeral. It's like, no, you've been working your entire life on what people are going to say about you at your funeral, man. I mean, you can't like get out the bigger cosmic eraser and erase it at the end. It's like, no, I want them to say that I was a really great guy. Well, you haven't been a great guy, so somebody's going to have to lie here.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's an interesting oddity that what we do on behalf of the person that's passed wishes instead of the grieving person's wishes.
Yeah.
It's
Well, it's like that old cliche, funerals are for the living.
Right. Or they should be.
Oh, they should be. Yeah. Like you're saying that there's a little bit of a fight over who the funeral's for.
Yeah.
Well, I want to steer us back a little bit to the day-to-day losses.
Okay.
Because it was easier, I think, to have some examples with some of those big losses.
Yeah.
But they don't, thankfully, come around just all the time. But there are the day-to-day losses. There is the loss of a patient or a client. There, just a few years ago, I moved out of the office that I had started my career in, and I was in there for 30 years. From a young counselor to an old counselor, and I left that office, and whoa, there was a surprising tug. And I thought, well, but that's kind of an everyday loss. I mean, it's an office, it's not a person.
How many times did you drive there on accident afterwards?
I would find myself on the way, particularly early in the morning.
Yeah.
I was thinking about something else. I was like, oh yeah, I'm just doing this thing.
Yeah.
So there, I think that if we look around, there are losses in a week. There are losses in a month. And I think they need to be respected too. Now, not at the level of having major funerals like we were talking about, but we don't want them to build up.
So I go back to the idea of rituals that you brought up, and there would be maybe some value in having a ritual for some of those things that were a bit more impactful for us. So like, for example, if you're in a location for 30 years and you're going to be moving, from that,
Mhm.
that might be a good time to have a celebration or a something in the parking lot to say goodbye to that place. Or,
Yes.
those kinds of rituals can help to form a closure on that, to kind of turn that potential grief into an easier segue, maybe.
Yeah.
Or
What I did is, even though I wasn't necessarily supposed to, I took my name off the door
okay,
and I took it over to the new office and I put that same plaque on the new office door.
yeah.
It's a
So why
small
was that
thing.
important? Why was that important?
Because I can remember that moment of being, very new and very proud to put that up there.
Yeah.
And I just didn't feel like leaving it.
Hmm.
That was like, okay, I leave the office and that's hard. I don't need another loss. I thought, well, that kind of symbolizes that person that I used to be, that I still remember very fondly. Have to grant him a little bit of grace on things because he screwed up sometimes. And I want to take that with me. And it seemed to be contained in that little sort of name plaque on the door.
Mhm.
And I pulled that off of there and stuck it on the new door.
I think that's somewhat similar to why we would choose to print out certain pictures nowadays, because we don't have many printed photos anymore. And so occasionally there might be an event or um, something that happens that we want to acknowledge the significance of, and can do that with a framed photo or a certificate or something to recognize that thing.
Photos are really fascinating because almost all photos are about a loss because that time is no more. And we particularly notice if that was 20 years ago, but even if it was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
There's Heraclitus' old phrase of no man steps in the same river twice. Well, because it's not the same river, but Heraclitus said also because you're not the same man. And it's like I look at this picture of who I was 20 years ago and what I did 20 years ago and the car I drove 20 years ago and all the, and a whole bunch of it's gone, you know. And so there are normal losses of
Yeah.
just growing older, moving on, doing things, the good things. But I always say it's those uh, playground jungle gyms with the like the horizontal ladder on top, the monkey bars.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you got a little kid and you're teaching them to play on the monkey bars and you hold them up and they grab the monkey bars, the problem isn't them reaching out for the next monkey bar. They do that instinctively. The problem is they won't let go of the monkey bar behind them.
Okay.
And then they get stuck because they're not letting it. Because what we learn to do is grab the one in front, release the one behind, swing forward, grab another, release, and then you learn that sort of, yeah, I got this rhythm here. Well, that's life. You know, I release the stuff that's behind me when I grab for the things in front of me. Now, if I don't release, I'm stuck, just like on the monkey bars. I'm just hanging there.
Yep.
And it's being able to get that rhythm down. That's a hard rhythm for people. It's not just a hard rhythm for me. I don't want to let go of that stuff.
Mm.
Pictures help. Memorializing helps. Telling stories, about it helps. Stories are a great way to memorialize it. But really, it's releasing.
Mhm.
It's all about I got to release the monkey bar behind me.
Yeah. Can we think of anything that would be a positive loss?
One of the things that's curious to me is there are whole bunches of losses. I can't quite say all of them, but maybe that are neither positive nor negative. They
Yeah.
might be sad, But as you just said, as sad as not caring for your dog, you now have that time back.
Mm-hmm.
As sad as it is to say goodbye to a pet that is, well, maybe suffering a bit,
Mm-hmm.
there's that moment where you realize they're no longer suffering. I mean, that's what's so complicated.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, a patient says goodbye, which makes room for another patient.
Yeah.
Another exciting opportunity. And in the moment, no, nobody wants to be reminded that, but when we back up a little bit, it's like, oh yeah, moving out of that office, there was that moment of grief. I moved into a marvelous new office. And as I moved, I got to rethink my practice. I wasn't in the same place, same thing. And I realized, what? No, was that a bad thing? Or was that a good thing?
Mm-hmm.
It hurt. It was sad, but I'm very excited about my new office and some of the new things I put in my practice, and that's exciting and growing. And am I to say that was a bad experience? But what about the good things? I'm saying that's a really good experience. Yeah, but what about the things I lost? It's complicated.
Yeah. Okay. One along those lines that's complicated is kids going off to college.
Oh yeah,
So parents become empty nesters. So
sure.
they've lost their kids, but
Yeah,
their kids are
but they don't
becoming
have him
adults.
living in the basement,
That's right. Yeah.
until he's 40. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's like, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah.
Okay, a wider piece that I might as well get into here. We're so funny that we assume that if it hurts, it's evil.
Hmm.
And there are
Right.
things that just hurt, and they're not bad. They hurt. I don't want a whole bunch of them, but I don't know that there's a moral taint to something that hurts. My kid going off to college, so they're not at home. Oh, what a terrible thing. That's not a terrible thing, but it is a painful thing.
Right.
But it's not a terrible thing.
Right.
We want to simplify. Oh, terrible things hurt you. And the way you know it was terrible is it hurt. And when there's a terrible thing, it will hurt. Man, that is such an oversimplification of life.
Mm-hmm.
It's nowhere near correct.
Right. All right. I have one that I think is less complicated and is strictly a positive loss. That is losing weight. Most of the time, unless you have a sickness causing you to lose weight. But otherwise, I think that weight loss is a positive thing for people when they're trying to do it. So that would fall into a category where you are not torn about whether it's a positive or a negative, or yeah.
Just to be obstinate.
Yeah, please.
Occasionally, people talk to me after they've lost a lot of weight. I mean, not minor, I need to drop 10 pounds to make this work. Sometimes they grieve for that person they were. It's like I look in the mirror, I'm kind of glad I look like this, but what about that other guy?
Interesting.
What I used to look like, and this doesn't quite look like me, but it's starting to look like me. But so there is this odd loss. Now it's not terribly painful, but there's still a loss, but maybe not a painful one.
Yeah.
I've also gotten to the age that, some elderly family members and our, parents and stuff are dying. And I have to be careful to say this wasn't a tragedy. It's sad, but it's not a tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
Tragedy is a 20-year-old dying
Mm-hmm.
from something stupid. That's a tragedy. Getting to the end of your reasonably good life and going in a reasonably painless fashion without fear. Wait a minute, that's really sad.
Yeah.
But that's not really tragic.
Right.
So I think is it a tragedy or is it just a sadness?
Right. that too is going to be somewhat subjective. I think we can put some boundaries, but those boundaries are going to have potentially some significant gray areas because of the subjective experiences that we have across the board.
Sure. And one of the big mistakes I see is people who want to, if it's not a tragedy, they just assume that it's okay, that there's no sadness there. Well, they were old, and no, I get that. It wasn't a tragedy, but it's like, oh, so it has to be a tragedy before you recognize I'm having a loss here?
Right.
Or that I deserve to be sad about something? People would say, what? Don't be sad about losing an office. I was like, no, wait a minute. That wasn't a tragedy. And it's kind of an everyday thing. My experience was some sadness. And I like that to be respected.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there are circumstances where we tend to really underestimate the positive side of just experiencing the emotion that's associated with whatever event, and we discount it rather than letting it happen, or even celebrating that we have this ability to have a range of emotions.
Yes. Yeah. One of the things that people find really disorienting and really awful is in deep clinical depression. Often they're numb. They've gone past the sadness part of the depression, and they're in the I don't feel anything. As human beings, we're not designed to not feel anything. That's awful. That's like eating unflavored grits the rest of your life. It's like, I can't deal with this. I was never made to not feel.
Mm-hmm. That is kind of a hallmark sign of depression, isn't it?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
That's you feel not, you're just muted. But isn't that also a side effect of some medications that are used to treat anxiety?
Used to be.
Okay.
Used to be. Back in the bad old days, they had two medications for anxiety. One is you don't feel anything, and the other is happy pills.
Okay.
Now, these days, when medication works right, it's able to contain without completely eliminating feelings.
Okay.
I often explain it like it's like working with a safety net. You might be sad, but you're not going to drop all the way to the basement.
Okay.
It gives you some room to feel sad, to feel happy, whatever, without plunging off the cliff.
Yeah.
That's the way it should work. Now, does it work that way for everybody? No. People, bodies are complicated. But that's what we're looking for, and it's much more achievable than it used to be.
Okay. Good to know. Thanks for listening. Gonna have a couple week break, and then we'll be back at you with a special guest. Stay tuned for that. If you have any comments or questions before then, inspiropodcast@gmail.com. Have a great day.